Everybody ready? Yeah. Y'all feeling okay? Yeah. Because you get caught sleeping, we go throw a bucket of water on you. So you better stay awake. This ain't your average history economics class here. This is the real deal. Everybody, clap your hands for Runoko Rashidi.
Well, good afternoon, brothers and sisters. Hotel. Let me begin in the African tradition. It's been observed already to first acknowledge all the elders in the room today and request their permission to speak. Do I have your permission to begin? Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Until yesterday, well, actually until today, I can say that there were 2 states in the South that I hadn't lectured in. One was Mississippi, and the other is Virginia. Now, all that changes with today. In fact, I had only been through Virginia one time. I took a Greyhound bus about 15 years ago from Atlanta, not even an Amtrak, a Greyhound bus, not even Continental Trailways, to Washington, D.C. And I remember stopping in Richmond for about 5 minutes, and that was the extent of my experience in Virginia. But now that I've been here just a few hours, I know I'll be back and I'm going to spend a lot of time here. This has been a wonderful experience already. I want to thank the Imani Foundation for bringing me here. I'm particularly grateful to Brother Sekou Garner, and give him a black hand in the Imani Foundation as well. I believe Brother Sekou and I began to correspond via the internet sometime in November. And I remember, I think I was on my way to Thailand and Cambodia, and I knew I wanted to come here, so I'm grateful to have this opportunity. Now, today's presentation is entitled Unexpected Faces in Unexpected Places, the African Presence Globally. And I'm going to use that word African over and over and over again, so get comfortable with that. And for many people, that might be a bit difficult, because I find in all my travel experiences, and I've now had a chance to lecture on 6 continents. I've lectured on every continent but Antarctica. And I'm looking for some black people down there so I can go down there too. But I find that wherever we are taught systematically to be anti-African. And to hate ourselves and to despise our roots. When I was a young child, and it is good to see so many children here today, because words are very, very powerful. I've learned that. And you never know what impact the words you speak are going to have on people in the audience. You never know where the next Marcus Garvey or Elijah Muhammad or Harriet Tubman or Rosa Parks are waiting to be inspired. But I remember as a child, if you had called me in African, we'd be scrapping. We'd be rolling in the dirt, because that was the worst insult you could possibly give me. But if you call me in African now, I'm just delighted. Brother Sekou, were you trying to get my attention, brother? Actually, it was sounding pretty good. I didn't even hear it there for a minute. Yeah, I've taught to be anti-African, and we're taught to be anti-African in Africa. I've done more than 1,000 presentations now, and a lot of times what I do, and I give seminars for teachers in the public school system, and my job is to teach teachers how to incorporate this information in the curriculum. I remember doing a presentation a few years ago in Sacramento, California. I was born and raised in California, most of my life in Los Angeles. I live in San Antonio now. And I remember doing a presentation supposedly for minority teachers. And there were maybe 3 or 4 black folks in the room. And one was actually born in Africa. This is a brother from Nigeria, a middle-aged brother. And towards the end of the day, he stood up. I didn't know what he was going to say. And he said, I want to thank you. This is something I'll never forget. He said, I want to thank you for making me feel proud to be an African for the first time in my life. Some of us never developed that sense of pride. But we might as well get comfortable with it, because although we were taken from Africa, we took Africa with us. And it's in us now. So we might as well get used to it. I can't think of any other group of people that are taught to despise themselves to the degree that we are. My job today is to do three basic things. Number one, and this is the easiest part, is just to present a lot of solid information. That's simple. That's no problem at all. Done deal. But the next part is a bit more difficult, and that is to engage people in critical thinking and deep analysis. In ancient Egypt, and I'm going to spend some time talking about the Nile Valley today, not a lot, but some. In ancient Egypt, or ancient Kemet, we called it, the Black Land, there was an expression, and that was, ignorance is evil. Ignorance is evil. In Africa, in antiquity. In America, what do we say? Ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is happiness, ignorance is joy. In American society, supposedly the greatest country in many people's eyes that the world has ever seen. Now, I can deal with ignorance. I can deal with people who don't know. What bothers me, what frightens me, are people who don't want to know. That's the critical thing. People who say, I don't want to hear that stuff. Whenever we have a program like this, the whole university should be filled with cars. People should be lined up wall to wall. But we have not reached that level. So what we have to do is keep plugging away and plugging away and plugging away. And when I say young brothers, like Brother Sekou Varner, it gives me so much pride and optimism toward the future. When I watch this brother get up here and handle himself with the knowledge and poise that he has, it just gives me a very good feeling, and I know our future is secure. So one more time, give it up for this brother right here. Now, I said I want to do three things, and then we're going to start the slide presentation. One is to give you the information. Number two, to engage you in some deep thinking, some critical analysis. Just to review one more time some thoughts that we had, and maybe just look at it again. And thirdly, is to hopefully inspire you, so that when you leave this room today, you don't just leave here feeling good and uplifted, although that is important, but you leave here with a stronger sense of commitment to our community, to our families, to our people, to Africa. It's not enough just to feel good. We must translate that good feeling into concrete action. One of our greatest leaders, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, used to say that thought without practice is empty and action without thought is blind. You must be a thinker, but you must also be a doer. And one without the other doesn't do us a whole lot of good. Now, I'm going to take you on a visual odyssey around the world. Strap yourself in, because we're going to visit many of the places that African people have been and African people are. There are about 1 billion African people scattered around this planet. 1 billion. Therefore, why should we see ourselves as minorities? We need to get rid of that. We need to begin to think on a far more international level. So I'm going to take you around the world. I'm going to show you where Africans have been and Africans are. You know that humanity began in Africa. We could turn to the first slide, my brother. Humanity began in Africa over 3.5 million years ago. Modern humanity, too, about 300,000 years ago. And a lot of those Africans began to leave the continent in small numbers for various reasons. We are migratory people. People move. I've even done presentations called History is the Movements of People. I've always been interested in where those Africans went and what happened to them. I would contend that there's only one race, and that's the human race, which originated on the African continent, which was black skin, woolly hair. You notice I point to my beard now. I can't hardly use this as an example anymore. And then we need to look at the role that African people have played in the development of classical civilizations. And when I talk about classical civilizations, I'm talking about urbanization. That is to say, people living in cities, towns, and villages, and writing systems or scripts, and agricultural science and the use of metal weapons and tools, whether they be in Africa itself, or in Asia, America, Europe, Australia, the islands of the Pacific. We want to examine all of that briefly. And then we want to look at, sadly, though it may make us, the enslavement process. You notice I said enslavement as opposed to slavery. Exactly. We are not a race of slaves. We are not descendants from slaves. We were a people who were captured, our ancestors were captured in Africa and enslaved and dispersed around the world. It is very important to look at that, but the problem is, all too often when we begin our assessment of the African presence in the world, we start with that. We start with the third phase. I went to California State University and UCLA in Southern California back in the 70s, and I remember the primary textbook that we used was From Slavery to Freedom. My history did not begin in slavery. Malcolm X was famous, our black shining prince, used to say, our history did not begin in slavery and it will not end in slavery. He also said, of all our studies, it is history that is most qualified to reward our research. But when I look at the enslavement of our people, those brothers and sisters who were branded like animals, sisters who were raped, kept in conditions of extreme brutality, enslaved dungeons, one of which, by the way, was called Fort Jesus. The first slave ship, by the way, was called the Good Ship Jesus. That's a real contradiction. Those people who were taken out of that door of no return, I'm looking at it from the perspective of people who fought in the face of overwhelming odds to maintain their basic humanity. Do you know, for example, that the first republic, since it's African History Month, that we got 1 month, the coldest, shortest month of the year, to begin to tell a story that requires at least 13 months a year just to get started. We got a glorious story to tell. The first republic in the Western Hemisphere, brothers and sisters, was called the Republic of Palmares, P-A-L-M-A-R-E-S. It lasted for 100 years. It was established by African people who refused to accept enslavement. These brothers and sisters were commonly called Maroons. And this republic, Palmares, in the heart of Brazil, was established in 1698. The Dutch, the Portuguese couldn't crack it for 100 years. Do you know that in this country alone, that's just in the United States, not Mexico, the Caribbean, South America, or Canada, that there were more than 250 major slave insurrections. One time, black people marched on the city of New York. Another time, they marched on New Orleans. And probably marched on Richmond and a lot of places right here that I don't know a whole lot about, and still need to be marching. And then you had in Florida, a glorious chapter in our history, that a group of people called Seminoles, composed of Africans and indigenous people in this country, commonly called Indians, because Columbus got lost and called them Indians, and we still call them that today, those of us who don't know any better, fought a sustained war of liberation against the United States government for 150 years. One of the great leaders that they had was a brother named Kofi Abraham. That is a purely Ghanaian name. A lot of these black people were never defeated in battle. In 1859, on the eve of the Civil War, 2/3 of the United States Army and 2/3 of the United States Navy was in Florida fighting those folk. It was a crime, it was a penalty to even mention in the state of Florida that there were in the state of Georgia, that there were black people in Florida with guns because of the example that they thought they might set among the other enslaved Africans. In Iraq, from 868 to 883, occurred what is called the Revolt of the Blacks, a rebellion that lasted for 15 years. Those brothers and sisters marched on Baghdad. Some of them were never defeated. So even when we talk about the enslavement period, we can do it in a manner that will inspire our people to greater efforts, to greater heights. The reason we are in this room today is because our ancestors in some cases laid down their lives, went to prison, made all kinds of sacrifices for this generation to be here. I don't think that our ancestors went through that door of no return for no reason. They went through it and survived in the most humiliating conditions the world has ever seen because they thought that another generation of African people would have a better way of life. We are that generation. And as a result of that, we must pledge ourselves as living memorials to those ancestors and say you did not die and suffer in vain. And we are here to redeem you. And we will make sacrifices so that new generations of Africans will benefit from that sacrifice and be able to move the struggle forward. Somebody say Ashe.
Ashe.
Now let's move forward. I could use some water or something to drink because I'm going to be running my mouth a lot. Don't go forward yet. Reverse it. Let's begin with this one. This is our first identifiable, at least it has been considered. Am I talking too fast? Because I tend to get excited when I'm talking about the history of black folk. And we need something to excite us. Big time. All strong people emphasize their history all the time. Weak people do not. And we are told that we are a people without a history. If you don't have a history, what kind of future do you have? If you don't know where you've been,
where you going?
Another African proverb says, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. One last African proverb I love to repeat, and that is, until the lion has an historian, then the hunter will always be a hero. It's time for us to produce our own historians and tell our own story. Let's begin that story with Dinkanesh. This is a black woman, or the remains of an African woman, and I love African women, big time. I think they're the most glorious things in creation. I love to see a black man with a black woman. Love that. I just got divorced, by the way, just in case you never know. Somebody might be interested, just in case. This is, it doesn't hurt to say it. This is Sister Dinkanesh, D-E-N-K-E-N-E-S-H. That means you are wonderful. These are Dinkanesh, D-E-N-K-E-N-E-S-H. Dinkanesh, you are wonderful. These are the bones of an African woman dated to be 3.4 million years old. They were found in western Ethiopia, a place called the Afar region, A-F-A-R, in 1974. They were found by an African, by an Ethiopian. Now, of course, there was a European American named Donald Johansen who headed up the team, and he achieved fame and fortune as a result of something that he had very little to do with. Does that sound familiar to you? You heard that story before? He called her Lucy because there was a popular song in certain circles, it was popular, I suppose, called Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, a Beatles song that was out at the time. I'd never really been too down with the Beatles. And they found these bones, and so they just flippantly, irreverently referred to her as Lucy. So we call her Dinkanesh. That is her true African name. Now at this time, 3.5 million years ago, there is no other humanity on any other continent. Humanity originated in Africa. We are the original man and woman on this planet. And all other people, like it or not, come from us. And some of them I know we want to disown, but they spring from us anyway, went into Europe in some cases and mutated. And that is what we call the European today. Next slide. Now let's briefly take a trip through the Nile Valley. Now I'm not going to just exclusively point to Egypt or Kemet. The word Kemet is the actual term. You have, and it has been described to me by some brothers from the Sudan, what might be called a Nile Valley pool. And from this pool flowed streams that went in different directions. Some of them are called Kemet, some are called Nubia, some are called Kush, some are called Taseti. One was called Meroe. You had one called Wawat. You had an African kingdom called the Land of Yam. The Land of Yam. No, that's African. And all of them were mighty kingdoms. But the baddest one of all, where Africans got off the most, is called Kemet. And sometimes we refer to it as Egypt of the Pharaohs. It is the finest expression of civilization that the world has ever seen. It lasted so long, we don't even know the beginnings of it. Maybe 20,000 years ago, maybe longer than that. We can't give it a precise date. That's called the pre-dynastic period. But Egypt in its real glory, or Kemet in its real glory, is the dynastic period. A dynasty is simply a family of rulers, one member of the family succeeding the other for an extended period. And dynastic Kemet is composed of 30 such families, about 26 of which were African. You have a few foreign dynasties. In fact, if you go to Kemet today, if you go to Egypt today, I know many of us have been there. I've had a chance to go 5 times in the last 7 years. Can't get enough of it. You find that the people, most of them, don't look like black folks. And most of the black people, every now and then you see a brother or sister. But when I went there the first time, I felt like a stranger in a strange land until I got to the deep south, an area called Aswan, which is a part of Nubia. Egypt was invaded first by a group called the Hyksos, about 1720. The word Hyksos means the shepherd kings. Some people have translated that into rulers of foreign lands. These are foreigners, these are Asiatic folks, non-Africans who come into the country about 1800, 1700 BC. And they are in power for about 150 years. And the ancient Africans call this period the age of national humiliation. They said they were never allowed to happen again. And then about 700 years later, it did happen. In fact, 500 years later, a group called the Peoples of the Sea. And they were defeated by a brother named Merentah, and later by another brother named Ramses III. Some people think that if a biblical exodus took place, it happened during the reign of this brother named Merentah. And then, about 675, another ferocious group of non-Africans entered the country, and they were called the Assyrians. And then after the Assyrians, beginning in 525 BC, a group called the Persians, and they were there for 125 years. They did damage big time. A lot of the papyri that was taken out of Africa is in Iran today, because before Iran became known as Iran, it was called Persia. And then the Greeks, under a fellow named Alexander, came in about 332. Now the Greeks fell in love with Africa, much to our regret. A lot of white folks love Africa. I wish black people loved Africa like a lot of Europeans do. Got to kick them out of Africa. Now, the Greeks, led by Alexander, came in and established what was called the Ptolemaic dynasty. And it was in power for about 300 years. Alexander himself was so much enamored of Africa that he requested that he be buried in Africa. And many Egyptologists believe that he is buried somewhere in the north, in the city of Alexandria that bears his name. Now, isn't it interesting that Africa, the place that a lot of us associate with Tarzan and Jane and King Kong and natives with big froze and bones in their noses yelling ooga booga, that these Greeks desired it so much that they built the largest of their cities, Alexandria, in Africa, not Europe. That Alexander was buried in Africa, not Europe. Now, if it was up to me, and we had the time and the energy, we got a lot of projects we need to pursue. We'd go look for his body, dig it up, and send it back to Europe where it actually belongs. Now, and then the Romans came under Augustus Caesar. And I haven't found any African ancestry in Cleopatra yet. Don't really want to find any. Cleopatra, I think, was a wannabe. If she could have been African, she would have been African. So the Romans came, and then the biggest invasion, and occupation of all, and that is the Arabs. The Arabs are non-African people. They were not invited to our home. Nobody sent them a letter of invitation saying, come on through. They invaded Africa. They enslaved our people. They softened it up to the extent that the Europeans could come in and pick over the bones. Those people are still in Africa today. They are not Africans. They have enslaved our people today in the Sudan and Mauritania. That is a disgrace. The idea that African people are enslaved in Africa today by non-Africans should be an insult to all of us. They are still there. They occupied Egypt, and they treat it as if it is their own. They exploit the monuments and antiquities of ancient Africa, and they disgust me. And then you have the French. Now the French are very important, because they came under Napoleon in 1798. Now, Napoleon's invasion of Africa is different than the others, and that he brings with his army of about 50,000 men, about 175 scientists, artists, and engineers. And these Europeans, these Frenchmen, begin to find out just how significant ancient Egypt had been. Up to that point, very few people had a problem, brothers and sisters, connecting ancient Egypt with Africa. It was just assumed that it was African. But when they began to find all these great things, Egypt was artificially severed from Africa. And we begin to hear about terms like the Middle East and the Near East, places you cannot find on a map or globe that exist in our imaginations. And why is that? Because 1798 was the height of the transatlantic slave trade, where African people are being removed by the millions to the Western Hemisphere to work and slave for non-African people. So they had to remove the greatness of Africa from the minds of our people and try to diminish that. And Europeans have done a marvelous job on that. They have done it so well that I have heard some ignorant Africans say things like, we don't even have to mention their names, you know who I'm talking about. Thank God for slavery, because at least it got us out of Africa. Can you imagine a Jewish person saying, thank God for Adolf Hitler and the Holocaust because it got us out of Germany? You hear black folks say, I ain't left nothing in Africa, I ain't no African. As Kwame Ture, the late Stokely Carmichael used to say, just because a cat has babies in an oven, you don't call the babies biscuits. Because you are born here does not determine your ethnicity and nationality. I'm so proud of being African, I don't know what to do. I love Africa. I love African people. I love African women, and I love myself. I love the work that I do. I feel like the ancestors have blessed me with a mission and a purpose, and all of us, I think, should feel that way. We should feel like we have a divine mission and purpose in this life, and that is all connected to the liberation and uplift of our people. Brothers and sisters, you can blame other people for your victimization, but you must look to yourself for your rehabilitation. That nobody, absolutely no one, is going to dig us out of the hole we're in but us. I believe that we can take our destiny in our own hands and do anything we choose to do if we believe in ourselves, if we love ourselves, and if we're willing to come together. And don't say black people can't unite, Africans can't get together. Look at yourself and say, now what am I doing to advance the cause of African victory? I believe that I am a soldier in the army of African liberation. Okay? And all of us must feel that same sense. Now, let's go back to Kemet, but I had to give that long preface and put it in a kind of a context. And it is a Sunday, so you forgive me if I do a little preaching. Now, this brother right here is named Aha Mena. He has a name that everybody should be able to remember. Aha, said the brother. He is the first king that we know of the first dynasty. And I've actually had a chance to see this artifact. It's been stolen from Africa, like so many things have been, including us, and taken, and it's in a museum in London. This is a magnificent piece. That crown that you see, probably you've got some brothers, even some sisters wearing it in the room today, and please patronize the vendors. You got some wonderful vendors out there selling all kinds of things. Let's support each other. Let's support positive black business establishments. He's on the throne for about 66 years. He's so tough, he lived to be 99 years old. By tradition, he died on the banks of the Nile River with a little spear hunting for a hippopotamus at the tender age of 99. That's a tough African there. His mother was very important. His mother's name is Hotep. And she is the first woman whose name we know in history. So when we look at Kemet, we're also looking at a society where women were highly uplifted, where women were very important. In fact, at the head of every dynasty is a female ancestral figure. You have a matrilineal line of descent and a matrifocal social structure. That is to say that the emphasis was actually on the female. You have sisters who became pharaohs, women who became high priests, women who became astronomers, women who became physicians, women who became mathematicians, women who became philosophers. They didn't use the B word in ancient Egypt. You never heard of a case of a woman who was assaulted or a child who was abandoned. We had it going on in ancient Africa. And we need to celebrate that, not just in February, not just on Martin Luther King's birthday, but every day, every minute of our lives, we need to celebrate our history, our heritage, our culture. Let's go to the next one. And I'm going to just go through these on Kemet briefly. I could do a whole presentation, a series of presentations on the Nile Valley, but I know most of you are very knowledgeable, and I want to share with you some aspects of African folks in other places, and thus the name Unexpected Faces and Unexpected Places. This is the great Imhotep, or Imhotep. Y'all already recognize him. Why is he important? Because he is the world's first multiple genius.
That's right.
He's a poet.
That's right.
He gives us the expression, as it has been translated, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Now, don't that sound like something my brother would say? He's so renowned as a physician that the Greeks are later to identify him with their own god of medicine, Aesculapius. He's the prime minister of the country. He's a high priest. He's an astronomer. He's an astrologer. He's an architect. He's so renowned in all these things that thousands of years after his death, people in Kemet would ask themselves the question, could there be another like Imhotep? Here we're talking about people who lived 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years ago in some cases, but who did things that are so significant, we talk about them as though they're with us in the room today. And that is because they had that mission and purpose in their life. Now, what is your mission and purpose? What are you here for? When I'm on these college campuses, I always challenge my students with that. What is your purpose? Why are you here? What are you trying to accomplish? Are you at a college campus because you're trying to see how many sisters you can lay up with? Are you on a college campus because you're looking for a white girl? Your ancestors didn't die for that. We didn't go through the door of no return for a frivolous reason. We can control our destiny, and we can determine in many ways what our legacy will be. Now here we're talking about a man who lived 5,000 years ago, a very powerful African. What are they going to say about us when we're gone? That there lived a great African people who, in the words of Martin Luther King, I think he once said at the height of the Montgomery bus boycott, I think I can quote him exactly. He said, let future generations say, let the history books say that there lived a great people, a black people, who injected new dignity into the veins of civilization. Or will they say there lived a trifling group of black folks who didn't fulfill their historic mission? Let's see what Imhotep left us next. This building right here. In fact, if we could maybe just move the slide projector a bit so that it's right in the center. There we go. This monument, which is called the Step Pyramid, many of us have been there and seen it. People like Dr. Ben, like Asha Kwesi, like Asa Hilliard, like Charles Finch, like Jacob Carruthers, like Pat Newton, like many others, have taken us to Kemet and shown us the still visible splendors of our ancient ancestors. I've been to this monument about 8 times, and it's like a jewel in the sand. It's in a place called Saqqara, S-A-K-K-A-R-A. It's about 200 feet high. It's made of limestone, and it is the first large stone building. Not only is it the first pyramid, but it's the first large stone building in the world. African genius developed that. And I'm not talking about slaves now. I'm talking about free African people here. Wasn't no Hebrews around at this time, and certainly they didn't have anything to do with this right here. Next. Now these are the so-called true or classic pyramids, and there are about 100 of these. I had read every book I could get my hands on in Egypt before I finally went there in 1992. And I had even read that extraterrestrials had come down, had beamed down to Earth, and gone to Africa and built these monuments. Of course, we also hear that a mysterious group of white folks came from somewhere, drawn to Africa, and built it. It's as though the Africans couldn't do anything by themselves. And again, a lot of us do not even recognize that Egypt is in Africa. A lot of us never make that connection. I try to go as often as I can. And whenever I take a big trip, I always go spend time with my mother. She lives in LA. She's 82 years old. I love her very much. I lost my father last year, so my mother's even more important. And I would say, Mom, I'm going to Egypt. I'm going to Egypt. I'm going to Egypt. She thinks when I take a trip, that's the terrorists are going to get me, right? And you never know, at that age, you might not see her again. So I spend time with her. So the trickster in me decided to do something a little mischievous. Once I went, and just before I went, I said, Mom, you know, this time next week, I'm going to be in Africa. And she said, boy, I thought you told me you were going to Egypt. See, she didn't know Egypt was in Africa. And a lot of us are like that. Slaves didn't build this. There are about 100 of these. They have been called miracles in stone. You can see them from outer space. These are built by 3 generations of African kings. The one in the foreground, farthest away from me, it was built by a brother named Khufu. The Greeks called him Cheops. And then the one in the middle was built by a brother named Khafre. It looks larger, but that's because it's built on a hill. And then you have the one closest to me, and that's built by a man named Menkaure. 3 generations of African kings established these monuments, these miracles in stone, over a period of about 80 years. The one in the farthest away from me is the Great Pyramid. That's the only one I have not been inside. It's 486 feet high. It takes up 13 acres. It's composed of approximately 2.5 million granite blocks, the average weight of which is 5,000 pounds. Even today, it is impossible to slide a razor blade between them. The stone was quarried about 500 miles away and rafted on a barge up the Nile or down the Nile to the construction site. Slaves didn't do that. In fact, we have detailed knowledge of the builders. We even know things like what they ate, where they lived, how they were housed, the relationship that they had with their family. We know their nicknames. They had nicknames like BB and Mimi and DD. Sure enough, Africans. For sure. And they were building to glorify God. In ancient Kemet, we strove for excellence. So different from today. Most of us are so willing to accept good enough. It's okay. Mediocrity. It'll get by. It'll pass. In Kemet, we strove for perfection. And that's something we need to return to. That's another reason history is important, for the lessons we can derive from it. And of course, this was a whole city. Today it is called Giza. And all up and down here, these are all tombs. And of course, Haramakhet, or the Great Sphinx, is not far from there. Next. This is Khafre. This is one of the major pyramid builders. You'll notice a lot of these, the noses have been chiseled off. That was done deliberately. You know, you do have some that were, sometimes the nose was knocked off accidentally. If you're thousands of years old and you made a stone and you fall over, your nose is subject to get chipped. And then it has been argued that the Egyptians believed that the seed or essence of life was contained in the nose, and that if you were to knock off the nose of the person, you would destroy their solar essence. An Egyptologist will tell you that. But it's obvious that a lot of this was done deliberately by people who later invaded Egypt and tried to mutilate the facial features of our African ancestors. This is King Khafre. Next. This is Nephepet-Ra Mentuhotep II. And he is one of the most important figures in world history. He is one of the most important kings to me. In Kemet, he is on the throne for 51 years. He comes to us from the 11th dynasty. He is in the color of divinity. In ancient Egypt, black represented the color of God. Black represented divinity. We need to return to that and begin to glorify blackness. He's in the form of a mummy. He's in the form of Asar or Osiris, a prototype for Jesus the Christ. Next. This is, and I see many of my Rastafarian brothers here. This is a brother with some beautiful locks. This is my favorite pharaoh of all time. His name is Namare Amenhotep III. The root of the word is Amen or Amen. Now don't stop saying it, because you heard it came from Kemet. Amen, which means the invisible one or the unseen one or the hidden one, became what you might call the king of the gods of Kemet at a certain time. And this brother's name embodies that. This is one of the greatest men that history has ever seen. He was on the throne for 48 years. His daughter came after him. His daughter became a pharaoh of the black land of Egypt. He built 2 pyramids. He was responsible for the construction of the largest building the world has seen, certainly in ancient times. The Greeks called it the Great Labyrinth. This building was 800 by 1,000 feet. It had 3,000 individual rooms, 1,500 above the ground, 1,500 below the ground. It is said that the ceiling of each room above the ground was composed of a single slab of granite estimated to weigh 30 tons each. Herodotus, the Greek father of history, who couldn't get enough of Africa. In fact, when this fellow came to Egypt, and you can read it in his book, The Histories, probably in the library right here. He says, and now we shall speak of Egypt, because nowhere else in the world are there so many wonders and so many things of unspeakable greatness. He described the labyrinth, that's what he called it. And he said, I have seen this building with my own eyes, and yet it is beyond my ability to describe. He said that this one building must have cost more in labor and money than all of the walls and public works of the Greeks put together. Just this one building. And this is the brother who's responsible for that. Somebody say Ashe.
Ashe.
Next. This is the great and illustrious Amos Nefertari. Talk about a black woman in the color of God. This bad little sister here. Stood about 5 feet tall, had thinning hair and buck teeth, I'm told, according to the mummy. And the people of Kemet loved her. They deified her as a goddess in her lifetime. That's the way an African woman should be treated. A special set of prayers were written for her that were in effect for 1,000 years after her death. She ruled jointly with her husband, Amos I, and she and her husband, Amos I, chased the Hyksos, the first invaders of Egypt, out of the country, so they became known as the liberators. And then she ruled jointly with her son, and then she achieved a godlike status in the reign of her son-in-law. It's a bad sister here. And this is from the British Museum. Remember, so many of these have been stolen and taken out of Africa. She has in her hand an ankh, the key of life, a symbol of male and female union. And this is a beautiful fashion statement she's making. Next. This is one of her descendants. This is Amenhotep III, also known as Amenhotep the Magnificent. Next. And this is his queen, the beautiful Queen Tiye, T-I-Y-E. They are the parents of 3 great African kings, a brother named Akhenaten, who is sometimes identified as the world's first monotheist, and then you have another son named Smenkhare, and then finally King Tut, or Tutankhamun, whose significance was that his tomb was so well concealed that it wasn't open, it wasn't ripped off until the 1920s, thereby a fellow named Howard Carter. Now, you rarely, if ever, see this picture on the cover of a book on Kemet. You see King Tut, you see that image of Nefertiti that makes her look like a white woman, but you don't see this image, and yet this is one of the most powerful women that the world has ever seen. Tough sister, Queen Tiye. Looked like a sister you saw in Sunday school this morning. Next. This is Usamare Ramses II, better known to us as Ramses the Great. I'm just going quickly down the dynasties. Aha, Dynasty 1. Imhotep represented Dynasty 3. Khafre was from Dynasty 4. Then I believe I showed you that Pepet-Ra Mentuhotep II of Dynasty 11. Amenemhet III of Dynasty 12, which is the classical age in literature and art. And then Amos Nefertari, Queen Tiye, and Amenhotep III. I know I'm going fast, because I want to cover a lot. The content is what's more important in the detail. They were from Dynasty 18. And Ramses the Great, as he was known, is from Dynasty 19. This brother also lived to be about 99. He was on the throne for 66 years and 6 months. A great family man, big time, had between 150 and 300 children. Took care of every one of them. That's the most important thing. Anybody can produce a child. Everybody's not prepared to assume responsibility for a child. That is the test of true manhood to me. By being willing to accept your responsibilities. He was a great builder. He had a big ego. Sometimes if Ramses saw a temple or a statue or a monument that somebody else had built, and he took a liking for it, he'd knock the other fellow's name off and put his name on there. He glorified the name Ramses to the point that 200 years after his death, the name Ramses was synonymous with kingship. And for those of you who do not think that the ancient people of Kemet were African, just compare it with this brother right here from Rwanda, a Theuti from Central Africa. In September, actually October, I was a scholar in resident at the University of Central Arkansas, a place called Conway. And I was hosted by a group called Umoja wa Africa. They represented 32 countries in Africa. French-speaking Africa, English-speaking Africa, Portuguese Africa, Spanish Africa. And they hosted me for a week, and I did a series of presentations. Now, the head of the organization was a brother named Jean-Claude from Rwanda. His father was a diplomat. At the age of 23, Jean-Claude speaks 6 languages. He's already lived in 12 different countries. But he told me, he said, Brother Runoko, it's not unusual for some of the students on this campus to seriously ask me if I have a tail between my legs. Another sister in the organization was from Niger in Western Africa. Her father was the former president of Niger. She says, Runoko, students have asked me and brought me to tears by asking me, do you all still live in the trees? People are just that ignorant of Africa. This is a university we're talking about. When I come back from Africa, sometimes people say things like, do they have cars in Africa? Do they have telephones in Africa? Do they still swing through the trees in Africa? And I'm talking about well-meaning people who don't know. But Brother John Claude said, Runoko, sometimes I prefer for them to ask me a question that we might perceive as stupid or insulting, rather than think those things and not raise the issue. We got a lot of education work to do. This is the great Ramses. Next. And this is Taharka. Taharka is mentioned in the Bible 3 times. He sent an army to Jerusalem to save his Jewish allies. When he was a prince, he led an army all the way to Spain from Eastern Africa. He's in the book of Kings, I think 2nd book of Kings, and Isaiah. He is a great warrior king. And Dr. John Henry Clark called his reign our last great walk in the sun. This is from the 25th dynasty. That's about 650 BC. Next. This is Hannibal Barca, the great and illustrious warrior king from North Africa, the country called Carthage or Carthatus, which means the new town. Hannibal, and he comes from a family called the Barca, B-A-R-C-A family, and it has been argued that they were actually founders of the Spanish city of Barcelona. Of course, Hannibal achieved lasting fame by taking an army with elephants across the Pyrenees, over the Alps, over the Rhone River to the doorstep of Rome, and fought the Romans who were trying to wipe the Africans out for 20 years. This is the great Hannibal Barca. This is Hannibal depicted on a coin. Next. This is Sultan, focus it please, Mansa Musa, a great Muslim king who led a pilgrimage, a Hajj to Mecca. He is Sultan of the Mali Empire. Of course, in West Africa, even after the fall of the great Nile Valley kingdoms, you have Ghana, you have Mali, you have Songhai, the heart of which was Timbuktu. Next. This is a beautiful piece from West Africa, from Nigeria. Brother Danny, I think, said his queen was from Nigeria, so this one is for you, sister. This is a beautiful piece made of bronze from Nigeria. Next. Now, these are some photographs that are new, and I couldn't resist showing them. These aren't unexpected faces, but I love images of African children. And I was finally able, after years of work, to accumulate enough photographs to do a presentation on images of African children globally. Let me share a few of those with you. This is a beautiful young child from Uganda in Central Africa, where the people of Yemen actually came from. I love that piece right there. Real pretty. Look at those eyes, and think about it when we get to Asia and that sandy-colored hair. Next.
Ooh.
From Kenya, these are from a community called the Pokot, P-O-K-O-T, Kenya. Next. From Mali, I love that hairstyle over there. Aren't they, darling? Next. From Niger, that's solid gold they're wearing on their ears. I know y'all would like to have those. Next. And also from Niger, and what can you say? Love our children, that is our future. Next. From South Africa, these people are called the San, S-A-N. They are known sometimes by the pejorative term Bushmen. Look at the hairstyles that you're starting to see a lot of brothers and sisters wear today. We were taken from Africa, but we took Africa with us. And it comes out in all kinds of ways. The clothes we wear, the bright colors sometimes. The gold sometimes we like to display, like the Ashanti in Ghana. The hairstyles. Our concept of time. Coming late all the time. What sometimes we refer to as CP time. Now, I used to be critical of that because I know we didn't build those pyramids because people came when they felt like it. But I also, after having been in Aboriginal Australia with black people over there, and they had what they call Abo time. And then being in India, among the black untouchables, they come late to a lot of things. Being around brothers and sisters from the Sudan, they have a concept called it's about time. We have a different concept of time. You know, Dr. Wade Nobles, one of our greatest scholars, used to say, and still says, that the essence of power is the ability to define someone's reality and make them live according to that definition.
That's right.
And that's what has happened to us. We are like a Frankenstein monster. We've been operated on, and then white folks can just go away and push the buttons, because our mind has been so distorted and operated on that sometimes we become our own worst enemy, and we don't understand ourselves. That's a part of someone else defining our reality, and we living according to their definition and not our own. Our concepts and standards of what is beautiful, what is desirable, most of that is based on somebody else's perception. Exactly. Let's go to the next one. And I think this is the last one of children in Africa. This is a nice one too. This is from Ethiopia. And this is important. Thank you, Brother Danny. Appreciate that. And thank you for the introduction, my brother. Also, how about another big round of applause for our poet? Okay? I was a wonderful poet. We are such a talented people. We're very special people. This is the base of the Nile River. This is Lake Tana. The Nile River is the world's longest river, the world's mightiest river. It's 4,191 miles long. It's composed of the Blue Nile, the White Nile, and the Advar River, and it flows north and empties out into the Mediterranean Sea. Next. Now this is a Nuba from southern Sudan. These people are fighting Arab enslavement today. You have one group called the Nuba, another group called the Dinka, the Nuer, and there's one and two other groups. And I met with about 40 of them in Kansas City in September. And they got up and talked about how the Arabs were enslaving them in Mauritania and the Sudan, burning their villages, killing the men, raping the women, and taking the children into slavery, most of them through Libya, and then on to the Arab countries. And then he asked me, looking at me right in the eye, he says, Brother Runoko, where are our African-American brothers and sisters? Why have you all abandoned us? He said, white folks help us all the time, but we need help from our African brothers and sisters. Where are you? And I just had to hold my head down in shame and say, brother, it's just because we don't know what's going on over there. And I pledged myself to help elevate that cause. Slavery in Africa in the year 2000. Next. Now let's go around the world. This is the major reason I was brought here, to show you some unexpected faces and unexpected places. And I've established something of a reputation for myself for dealing with the African presence in Asia. In fact, I'm beginning to wonder if there are more Africans in Asia than are in Europe. This is from ancient Syria in Western Asia. This is 2,000 years old. A black nobleman. Next. This is a depiction of Ishmael. Ishmael is a traditional ancestor of the Arabs. He is the son of Abraham or Ibrahim and a black woman from Egypt named Hagar. He and his father supposedly helped establish the Kaaba sanctuary at Mecca. Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad's grandfather, a man named Al-Muttalib, is supposed to have fathered 10 sons or 10 lords, each of whom was as black as the night and magnificent. One of them was Abdallah, the father of the Prophet Muhammad. In the earliest days of Islam, when things were hot in Mecca, Muhammad was advised to send his closest companions to Africa, across the Red Sea to Ethiopia. He was told, if you look to Ethiopia, there you will find a land of righteousness ruled by a king under whom no man is persecuted. It is a land where God will bring you rest from all of your afflictions. And the earliest Muslims went there. And when they came back to Mecca, when things had settled down and Islam was established there, Muhammad coined an expression that said, he who brings an Ethiopian woman or an Ethiopian man into his house, an African man or an African woman into his house, brings the blessings of God there. The first Muslim to die in battle, Mija, was a black man. Muhammad's closest companion is a black man from Ethiopia named Bilal. According to J.A. Rogers, one of our great scholars of all time, some of his books may be out front, the Prophet of Islam told Bilal, Bilal, last night I dreamed I went to paradise, and I found that you had been there before me. You have black imams, black muftis, and you have a prominent black presence in Arabia today. Next. This is a depiction of what is described as a South Arabian temple guard. That's a bad brother right there. The sisters seem to love that slide, and I wish I had about 10 brothers like that just to go around in my slide presentations, okay? Don't let anybody go early. Make sure everybody buys something. Keep everybody in line. Next. This is a brother from southern Arabia today, the Arabian Peninsula. Next. This is a sheikh from Arabia, from Saudi Arabia, a Saudi. You have Prince Bandar. You got a lot of folks like that. Not only is he a sheikh, he was the Minister of Finance. This photograph was taken in 1954, the year I was born. A lot of black folks like that. The Crown Prince of Kuwait is a black man. You have black people in Oman, in Abu Dhabi, in Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, Yemen, Jordan, Israel, Syria. Black people in all these places today, and we are not really connecting with them. We got to change that. Next. This is a sister from Palestine. She was a former student at Howard University. I lectured at Howard last night. I was told by the person who gave me this photograph, Dr. Khaled Abdul Al-Mansour, that this was the first wife of Yasser Arafat. So at least Yasser had good taste. This is a sister from Yemen. Now we're in southern Arabia, in Yemen, in the Arabian Peninsula. This is a black medical doctor. And isn't that beautiful what she's wearing? Next. This is from ancient Turkey. This is 2,000 years old. That story has not been told. Next. From ancient Afghanistan. I call this piece The Man from Afghanistan. This is in Central Asia. This is a brother, a warrior. Now notice as we move into South Asia that the texture of the hair changes. And you begin to see black people with naturally straight to wavy hair. This is made of terracotta. This was taken from a place in Afghanistan called the Hall of the Black-Skinned Warriors. Next. Now this takes us to India. And this is a photograph that I shot myself. A lot of these are my own original photographs. This is taken from a city called Bodh Gaya. And this is a statue of the Buddha. Bodh Gaya is the place where, as you know, the Buddha is supposed to have sat under the Bodhi tree and received enlightenment. And I had a chance to go there in 1998, and I took this magnificent photograph, this photograph of this magnificent black statue of the Buddha. And I was surprised to learn that the Buddhist priests who ran that temple actually are familiar with my work. Because I've been working with the people called the Dalits, D-A-L-I-T, or the Black Untouchables of India since 1986. I went there, and let me just tell you a bit about the Untouchables of India. The name untouchable implies that the touch of these brothers and sisters is thought to cause pollution and contamination in Hindu thought. These are the most oppressed people in the world. In many parts of India, I have seen this with my own eyes, they are forced to live like animals. A common form of humiliation that they are meted out every day in some parts of India is to make them eat human excrement, to force them to drink human urine. In some parts of India today, in 2000, they cannot hold their heads up while walking down the street. Women are constantly raped. People burnt alive. I've been in communities in India. For example, I've been among a community in a place called Patna. This thing is this, you were saying partner and you were speaking Ebonics. Patna in East India. And there's a group of black folks over there called the Dome, D-O-M. The Dome earn their living by scavenging. That means they clean toilets with their hands. And they put the feces in a bucket and walk to the edge of the community and dump it. And you can see this with your own eyes if you know the right people who will take you there. And you can see the feces just streaming down their neck. Some of these brothers and sisters are taught that their mere shadows will cause pollution. They are taught that in Hindu thought, because of karma and rebirth, something that they did in a previous lifetime, they're being punished today. A lot of us believe that. We believe we've been cursed, or we offended God, or we did something. Otherwise, why are we in the condition that we're in? These are questions that we're grappling with, and these brothers and sisters really suffer. And I love them. Spend a lot of time with them. Let me show you a few images of them next. Actually, this is before we get to the Untouchables. This is one last picture of a brother from early India. His name is Malik Ambar. He's another Muslim. He was captured in Ethiopia around 1575, taken to Asia and enslaved. He became a Muslim. He gained his freedom. He became a great guerrilla warrior. He built the post office. He built the mosque. He put poets and scholars and historians on pension. Love him for that. And all of his monuments he made of black stone. He became known as the Admiral of the Indian Ocean. And he was from the West Indian state of Gujarat. Next. Now these are some of the dollars on Untouchables today. Black people with African features straight to wavy hair. I've had 3 tours to India, 3 educational tours. On one occasion, I went over there for 21 days by myself. Had all kinds of adventures. And this is a young black woman from South India. Now, you don't see any of these people on television, do you? Next. This is a tribal woman. She's from a group called the Banda, B-O-N-D-A, from East India, in a state called Orissa. Now, she looks like she could be Maasai from Kenya. Next. This is how they worship God. They worship God in the form of a black female. Now that's deep. And as a secure African man, I have no problem with that.
That's right.
A black woman is God to them. What's wrong with that concept?
Nothing.
I know I'm in Virginia, but what's wrong with that? Next. In the Bible Belt. This is a brother named Satya Sai Baba. He's from the deep south of India. He's regarded as a miracle worker.
That's right.
Next. Now, I went to India for the second time in 1998, and I was in the deep south in a city called Trivandrum in a state called Kerala. And I was honored by a group called the Kerala Dalit Panthers, who named themselves after the Black Panther Party. And they had me march in a rally down the middle of the street, blocking traffic. Naturally, they put me in front, holding this flag, and we all shouting, "Black is proud, black is strong. We salute the blacks alone." That's what they were saying. And then that evening, myself and this brother right here, who has the interesting name of Ambu Jackson. Now, that's the name for a brother in South India, Ambu Jackson. And Brother Ambu and I became real tight. Ambu likes to talk. I'm told sometimes he'll speak for 5-6 hours at a time. So we spoke that night, and I was fortunate to be able to speak first. And I'm told he went on to well into the morning hours. And I was asked to address the lecture I did, or the presentation was, "We are one African people." And it must have been 5,000 people there. A hot night in a city called Trivandrum of 1 million people, where the dollars have been so dispossessed, they don't own a single business establishment. And the Kerala Dalit Panthers are trying to organize them. So every time I would get up and speak, and I would say something like, "The black people in India, and the black people in America, and the black people in Africa, and the black people in South America are one people," the audience would just go ballistic. It's like they had been waiting to hear that all their lives. There's a rising African consciousness movement in India. Now, before I went over there, I got a call from London the day before I left from my publisher of a book called African Classical Civilizations. Are y'all still with me?
Yeah.
And my publisher, who I hadn't talked to in 2 years, don't even know how he got my phone number. That's how close our relationship is. He called and says, "Runoko, what's going on?" I said, "I'm all right. What's up with you?" And we chatted for a minute or two, and I said, "Man, I got to go. I'm going to India." He says, "Yeah, I know." And I said, "How do you know that?" He says, "Because I was having a meeting with a spiritual person, and all at once that person shouted the name Rashidi. And do you know somebody named Rashidi?" And he says, "Yeah, I know somebody named Runoko Rashidi." And the spiritual person said, "Well, call him right away and tell him he is in grave danger." Now, that's not what you want to hear when you're getting ready to go halfway around the world by yourself. You don't want to hear it anytime. So I got all these ankhs. I had a statue of Osiris. I had a statue of the Buddha in one pocket, Osiris, and all these ankhs. I told a friend of mine that. He says, "Runoko, later for that, what you need is a knife." I wasn't going to take a knife to India. So I had all these ankhs, and people kept looking at me, and they said, "Are you a Christian?" And I said, "No, why would you ask me that?" Because you have all those crosses on. And I said, "Oh, this isn't a cross," meaning no disrespect, because I respect everybody's religion. That should not be something that we allow to divide us. Not religion. didn't allow language to divide us. None of those things that have been imposed upon us by other people. So I said, this is an Ankh, and I explained what it was. It's an ancient African symbol of representing male and female union, the key of life. And they liked that. So when I came back the next year, I went there again in April. I took 17 brothers and sisters with me. I met one of the guys who had asked me about the Ankh. This brother had made 3 Ankhs out of coconut shell. And one of them, he had red, black, and green beads on there. I've been to parts of India where I have been met by people shouting, "Free Mumia Abu Jamal." There was a reception for us in New Delhi, and the person who spoke on the life and times of Malcolm X. I went to a place called Bhubaneswar, where the brother who was the moderator of the program, who reminded us all of Dr. John, the great Dr. John Henry Clark, finished the day by reading the immortal words of Claude McKay, "If we must die." Ooh. You know that poem that says, "If we must die, let it not be like hogs pinned in an inglorious spot." That is the level of African consciousness in India. So when I came back to Trivandrum, the police would not let me speak. They followed me from the airport and summoned me to the commissioner of the police who took my passport and asked me what I was doing there. I said, "Man, I'm a tourist." He said, "A tourist, huh?" He said, "Well, who invited you here?" I said, "The Dollar Panthers." "Dollar Panthers?" And he said, "Well, what are they going to do?" I said, "Well, they organized the rally." Well, I'm supposed to be the keynote speaker. The Dollar Panthers told me they were going to have 10,000 people there that night from all over that state. Police said, "No way." Our enemies are definitely afraid of Africans uniting on an international basis because that's the end of white supremacy. They understand that. Let's go to the next. Let me show you a few more on India. Next. Now, this is in that same city. This is what a lot of people look like. Now, that's me on the end, if you haven't guessed. Look at this sister. Now, the reason yes, she is beautiful, but the reason we took the photograph is because it looks as though we could be related. Right. Next. I also had a chance to go into the rainforests of South India and visit what are called Adivasis, A-D-I-V-A-S-I-S. And these are tribal people. They represent the original people of India. These are little bitty people. They live all over the country, but this particular group lives in the rainforest of South India. Now, we drove and drove and drove. I had to get a driver, a translator, a guide, and 1 or 2 other people just to take me there. And we drove all day. I'm paying for all this now. I'm not complaining, but I'm paying for it. We drove all day over hill and dale, over stream and creek, up mountains, down hills. And finally I said, "You know, how much further is this?" And they said, "About a half hour. An hour would pass." "Well, how much further?" "About another hour. 2 hours would pass." "Well, when are we going to get there?" "Oh, about another hour." So finally I said, "Look, I've had it." And they just ignored me and just kept right on driving. I didn't want to get stuck there. And finally these little people started popping out of the forest, looking at me. Next. And you get an idea as to what they look like. Now, one of the good things about it is that I felt tall, perhaps for once in my life, right there. That man was about 50 years old, and his wife was 40 years old. And this is in the rainforest of Southwest India. Next. This little lady, they're my guides and translators. This little lady saw me from a distance and followed me for you see some of the Ankhs right there? This little lady followed me for an hour. Through the forest, it was 100 degrees. A little swarm of bees were following me around. People offered me the fruits of the forest. Everybody would offer me tea. That's a big thing in India. I think that's where the British got the idea of tea time from. And they would offer me things like raw honey. And somebody handed me a cup of raw honey, and I looked down in there, and there were all these bugs in there. But to refuse it would be to insult them. So I took a little sip, and I said, "Oh, it's delicious, you have some," and handed it to the next person. So after about an hour of that, my spirit of adventure had been seriously diminished, and I was ready to go back to my hotel. So that lady kept following me, and finally she caught up with me, and through a translator, she says, "I know that you are not from here." And I asked him, I said, "How often do you all have visitors?" He said, "Visitors? Nobody ever comes here. And if they do, we chased them away with our machetes. Fortunately, they weren't waving a machete at me. And she said, I know you are not from here, and that you must be from somewhere far, far away. But I feel as though you are a part of me, and I'll never forget you. And I must admit, I broke down and cried like a baby. It's a heck of a thing to be 12,000 miles from the place you call home, and a place you've never been or thought you would go, and people say we have a spiritual connection. Next.